right, today we're jumping into what might be one of the most demanding and symbolic job profiles in the ancient world, the Israelite high priest. And trust me, this wasn't your typical 9 to 5. This role came with divine instructions, and yeah, some pretty serious life or death consequences.
So let me just ask you this to kick things off. What if the clothes you wore to work were more than just a dress code? What if your uniform was actually a direct line to the divine, something that could seal the fate of an entire people? Because that's the world we're about to explore. A sacred job with an extreme uniform and responsibilities that were quite literally a matter of life and death.
So, where does a job like this even come from? Well, our source material takes us all the way back to a divine call to just one family, from the tribe of Levi. We're talking about Aaron and his 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. They were the very first ones chosen for this holy calling.
Now, at its heart, the job description was actually pretty straightforward, but it was also completely monumental. The priest was the ultimate go-between, the spiritual bridge that connected God with the everyday lives of the community. They were the official mediators, and every single thing they did carried an immense amount of weight.
Okay, so let's talk about that uniform. We have to understand these weren't just clothes. These were sacred instruments, every single piece crafted for dignity and beauty, designed to show everyone, hey, this is a holy job. The high priest's outfit was incredibly detailed, a full 7 separate items, all meticulously made, and each piece had its own special purpose and some really deep symbolism, from the ephod, which was this kind of sacred vest, all the way to a golden plate he wore on his turban.
And what's so fascinating here is the contrast. You see, a regular priest wore a pretty simple 3-piece uniform. But the high priest, he was decked out in 7 ornate layers. This visual difference immediately told you who was who and signaled his unique, elevated role in the whole system.
So let's zoom in on that ephod for a second. On its shoulders were 2 onyx stones, and engraved on them were the names of all 12 tribes of Israel. I mean, this is such a powerful image, right? The high priest was literally carrying the weight of the entire nation on his shoulders, constantly presenting them before God.
And attached right to that ephod was something called the breastpiece of judgment. Get this, it was set with 12 different precious stones, carnelian, topaz, emerald, you name it, and each one stood for one of the 12 tribes. The symbolism here is just beautiful. It's this idea that God saw his people as unique and incredibly valuable, just like precious jewels.
And to top it all off, the final piece of this sacred uniform was a gold plate fastened right to the front of his turban. And on it was a simple but profound inscription, Holy to the Lord. This was a constant reminder that the high priest's mind, his entire being, and everything he did was set apart for God.
So how in the world do you even get ready for a job like this? Well, the onboarding process, if you can call it that, was an intense 7-day-long ceremony of consecration, all designed to ensure absolute purity and holiness. The whole ritual had 3 main parts. First, there was a washing with water, which symbolized purification. Second, anointing with a special oil, which set the priest apart for God's divine purpose. And third, a whole series of very specific animal sacrifices to atone for sin. And here's the thing, this was no one-and-done ceremony. This entire elaborate ritual, they repeated it every single day for 7 days straight. As you can see, that number 7 is a big deal. In the biblical story, it represents holiness and perfection, really hammering home just how sacred this role was meant to be. So after all that preparation, what did the actual job look like? Well, once ordained, the high priest stepped into the incredibly high-pressure role of the nation's representative. And this wasn't just about showing up for the big holidays. No, it was a daily grind of immense responsibility, overseeing sacrifices, maintaining the holy spaces, teaching the law. This is where that idea of holiness met the tense reality of daily practice. And you want to talk about high stakes? The source we're looking at points out this really dramatic detail about the high priest's robe. Gold bells were literally sewn into the hem. So as he was moving around in the holy sanctuary, those bells had to keep ringing. If they suddenly went silent, it meant a ritual was done wrong and he had been struck dead on the spot. I mean, talk about a high-pressure work environment. Tucked inside that breastpiece, the high priest carried 2 mysterious objects called the Urim and Thummim, which means light and perfection. These are basically used to get a direct yes or no answer from God on really critical national decisions, like should we go to war, where should we camp? You can almost think of it as a divine hotline for the leadership. And this idea of total holiness,
it extended to the priest's own body. During that ordination ritual, sacrificial blood was dabbed on his right earlobe, his right thumb, and his right big toe. The point here was that every single part of his life, what he listened to, the work of his hands, and the very path he walked, had to be completely dedicated to God.
Now, this wasn't just a temporary gig, it was a lineage. The role of the high priest and all those sacred garments were designed to be passed down through the generations of Aaron's family, making sure the priesthood would continue on.
So when a high priest died, his designated successor would inherit the holy garments. But he couldn't just throw them on and start the job. Nope. He had to go through the very same intense 7-day ordination ritual himself to reaffirm his own purity and consecration for the role.
Now here's where the source material makes a really interesting connection. It draws a direct line from this ancient history straight to the New Testament, where it highlights a passage that calls Christian believers a royal priesthood. It basically reinterprets the whole concept, suggesting that the role of mediating and living a holy life is extended out to the wider community.
So the main takeaway from the source is this: getting the title of a royal priesthood isn't just some honor you receive. It's a call to action. It comes with this profound responsibility to live a life that reflects holiness and purity, kind of echoing the same high standards set for those ancient priests.
And all of this leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This ancient role was so clearly defined by these sacred garments and meticulous rituals. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? In our world today, without the special robes and the bells, what is it that truly defines a sacred role or a holy calling?